Welcome back, Axis and Allies players. Viper here, the American Revolution, straight from the nest. Wars of the World Series 2 coming up. Nato, while he introduces us to the game for this part 1. Thank you. Welcome back, guys. Here we are, Series 2. It's the American Revolution, and as you guys know, the English won our war. If you guys were watching the last series and the last set, in English, the English, Prussia, and Portugal took the win of the game. Now remember, the game series that we are building here actually legacies back to the game that was played prior, so that is something to remember as we go through each game. A couple of things that are going to go happen here. Remember that we are using the Global War board. Thank you, historicalboardgaming.com, and Z-Man Games from Merchants and Marauders for the ships that we have that we are utilizing. And we also have Risk from Parker Brothers and some other things that we're going to throw in there too. Also, some of the things that we're not going to throw in there. Now, I did throw this in there as a snippet just so that we're not having any animosity, but it is something to remember. We do want you guys to know that although we know that there were Native Americans in the American Revolution, we are not including them in this game, not because of game mechanics, but mostly because we don't have the space on the board game to actually do so. Another thing we're not going to include is the naval battles that were on the Great Lakes. So that is also something you guys want to include and remember as you're putting it together. Another thing, if you did watch part 11 of the Series 1, the 7 Years' War, you'll notice that the English had a very large army still stationed all over the world. Now they don't. So when Nato comes up and he starts showing you guys the games, which is going to be here in just a moment, and he starts giving you the game mechanics and the rules, notice that the English do not have those large impacting armies anymore. A lot of that has to do with logistics, it has to do with economics, it has to do with a couple of different things. Because once the 7 Years' War was over, or the French-Indian War, whichever you want to call it, they actually had to downsize. They had to pay off their loans, they had to pay off their debts, and the first thing that gets cut is the military. And in essence, our game reflects that as well. So we're going to keep watching as we watch those transports come over from the nice big royal island over into our beautiful American nation. As the colonists decide to get themselves together, start a snowball fight, and our glorious George Washington starts the first global war that America was actually in. Go ahead, Nato, get us through those introductions.
Hello everybody, this is Nato at the Nest with the intro to the American Revolution, continuing from the 7 Years' War. And since how England won the 7 Years' War, America will be fighting the British for its independence instead of the French. Now, the American Revolution is, I think, known well enough that I don't have to really go in too much about the history of the American Revolution and what it was about and why it was fought and all that stuff. So I think I'll just skip to what's new and added to this scenario that was different from the 7 Years' War. So what's new is a new unique unit. The British can hire Hessians in this scenario. Hessians were German mercenaries, and historically the British hired somewhere around 30,000 of them, so they constituted a major force in the war. And for gameplay wise, the British will be able to buy one Hessian a turn, and they don't need a factory to be placed, so they can be placed in any friendly territory. Spain will have a graduated income. What I mean by that, they start off at 3 IPP, and each turn they'll roll a dice, and whatever the roll result is will be added to their income up to the maximum of 34. That white piece right there, that represents Benjamin Franklin, and the Americans can send him to France. As soon as he gets to France and Spain will be able to start leasing money to America to help out in the war. And also, as soon as he gets to France, America can then start making influence rolls on France. and once they get to 20 points, then they can bring France into the war. So they, or they can enter at their historical date, but this gives America a chance to bring in France maybe a turn or two earlier. See, other than that, everything else is roughly the same. England's goal is to put down the rebellion and retake the colonies. America, and steal France's outposts in India once they get involved. America's goal is to hold off the British and survive until the end of the game. And we'll get into France and Spain's goals once they enter. So basic British strategy for now is, well, they need gonna need to be sending more troops to America. They only got one mainline infantry and the rest are all militia. That's not going to be enough to hold or retake the colonies when the American rebels start producing their own frontline troops. So that means transports, and lots of them, and probably more frigates, because eventually France and Spain are going to get involved. So ships and a lot of them. So the big question is where to land those troops. England could, it starts off the game with New England, the Boston area. So England could just take the shorter sea route and land them all in Boston and just try to drive south and fight a narrow one-front conflict. Or it could take another route and take a longer sea lane route and land them in the Carolinas or around and land them in New Orleans and try to retake the colonies in a pincer, with troops moving down from the north, from Canada, and troops moving up from the south to try to catch the Americans in the middle. That's England's two options I see. It's the shorter route but narrow front, one front fight that will play into America's favor, or the longer route, take much longer to get troops there, but will catch the Americans in a pincer. I don't know which strategy I'm going to go with yet. Hopefully I have it figured out by the next video. America's strategy is going to be a lot simpler. America's strategy is going to be very reactionary. It's pretty much just going to be responding to whatever England does, or wherever England sends forces, America is pretty much just going to have to send forces there too. So pretty simple strategy for them, very reactionary. Just go where the redcoats are, pretty much. Let's see. Am I forgetting anything? Well, probably forgetting something, but but I think that's it for now. If I missed anything, I'll probably think of it after I shut off the video and bring it up next video. But we'll see you with the end of the first turn, starting in 1775, and that'll be the first half of 1775. See you then. Hello everybody, this is Nato at the Nest, and this is the first half of 1775 of the American Revolution and the very first turn. England, by the rules, England came down from New England and attacked the Northeast, and they are actually successful in that, so they took a very valuable territory from the Americans, so right out of the gate the Americans are having a bad turn so far. The war's not going very good for the rebels so far. And then that purple chip is the Hessians, so England bought a Hessian. And then loaded up a transport and started sending it across the Atlantic to reinforce their forces in America. And bought a frigate, bought another transport, bought some troops, and that was it for England. America, it paid the $4 to get Benjamin Franklin heading across the Atlantic to try to woo the French into joining the American cause. And it couldn't attack anything because it didn't have anything besides the militia, and militia can't move, so it couldn't attack, so it just bought units. Built up Washington and New York. Let's see, France bought a frigate and bought some troops, and then just moved everything from Paris into Bordeaux. Probably in preparation for when it does join, it can have troops in position to start heading over to America right away to help as soon as possible. Spain did similar action. It moved some troops over to Leon Castile. It doesn't have any transports right now, but that's because Spanish production is only 3 for the moment. But it still moved them ahead anyway to be in position for when it does. And then Spain's production roll, they rolled a 6, so the maximum they could get for the turn. So that was really good for Spain. So Spain's production is now sitting at 9. And that was it for the turn. Pretty quick, but it's a very first turn, and so not much is going to be going on the first couple turns, as everyone's spending most of the turn building up and getting troops into position so they can fight. And so we will come back. So we'll come back next turn for the second half of 1775 and see what the Americans and the British can conjure up for the next turn. Thanks for watching. See you then. Hello everybody, this is Nato at the Nest, and this is the second half of 1775 of the American Revolution. And the war continues to go badly for the Americans, as the British have taken New York, and aside from it being a major city, that's also one of America's factories. So that was a pretty huge blow for America, and so far it is following fairly historically accurate. The first year and a half went horribly for the Americans in Washington, including the fall of New York, probably one of George Washington's biggest defeats. Then England offloaded, and also when England attacked New York, it was a two-pronged attack. Well, technically three-pronged. It pulled troops from the northeast and took the Hessians down from New England, and then landed that cavalry and cannon from the coast. So it was actually a three-pronged attack. Took New York, and then England loaded up another transport with 2 infantry and sent it across the Atlantic. So England's coming on strong with America, trying to offload as many troops as they can and hit America as hard as they can before France and Spain can intervene. They bought another frigate and another transport and as many troops as they could afford. And then the British bought another Hessian. They lost the Hessian in New York, but then bought another one and put it down in the northeast. Then America took its forces from Washington and counterattacked and retook the northeast, killing that Hessian unit. So that was almost synonymous with Washington's famous attack across the Delaware at the close of the year. So this was not by design by any means, but it almost by happenstance. The first 2 turns have pretty much followed what actually happened historically. So that's kind of interesting to see. See, Benjamin Franklin is moving closer to France, and if you're wondering, yes, he can walk on water, hence the lack of a transport. Next turn, he will be in France, and France and Spain will be able to lend-lease desperately needed money to the Americans, and then more importantly, start making his influence roles to get France into the war. France, in pursuant of that, bought another frigate and cavalry. Debated on whether or not to buy another frigate or buy a transport, but decided that a frigate right now is more important because France could have all the transports in the world, but if it doesn't have naval supremacy, or at least naval equality, those transports aren't going to get anywhere close to America. So I opted to buy a frigate and have France worry about transports when they've at least secured a sea lane to America. Spain, because it can't afford frigates yet, bought a transport and a militia, and then on its production rolled a 4. So Spain now has production of 13, so next turn it can buy its first frigate of the scenario to help France in securing naval supremacy, which will be a key factor in America and its future allies winning this conflict in the scenario, and making sure that there is an America for later scenarios, because World War I and World War II just want to be the same without America in it. But anyways, that wraps it up for the first year of the Revolution. Next turn is a new year in 1776, and the hopes of a fledgling democracy. Speaking of that, this is also the first scenario where ideologies are involved. The previous one was just monarchies fighting other monarchies, but this is the first scenario where 2 opposing ideologies are facing off. We got the new idea of democracy versus the monarchy. And granted, England had a parliament, but as a very basic overview. And granted, France and Spain were both monarchies, so they didn't help us out because they agreed with our ideology. France and Spain joined the war with us against Britain, more or less for revenge for what happened in the 7 Years' War, but at least for us, it was an ideological war. Anyway, that's enough of me rambling. We'll see you at the end of the next turn.